Hello, good morning to everyone. I am Samuel Medina Claros, and I'm really pleased to present the paper I am working on together with my colleagues, um, María José Angulo Guerrero, Elena Bárcena Martín, and Salvador Pérez Moreno from the University of Málaga in Spain for the 16th International Conference of Interdisciplinary Social Science. The paper I am going to present is a very preliminary version that it's called Labor Market Regulation and Gender Entrepreneurship. So any questions, suggestions, and any further intentions or suggestions that you could have in order to improve it will really welcome in order to improve this preliminary version. I will try to follow mm, the following structure. We will present the motivation that we had to underpin this investigation. We will later focus on the literature review. We'll present the data and methodology, and finally the results and the concluding remarks. So with that in mind, I will begin. We preliminary think and present that entrepreneurship is a gender activity in which women and men do not account equally in order to begin an entrepreneurial project. In this case, also, women used to have stricter higher barriers in order to begin any entrepreneurial project than men. We also account that usually women are pushed to entrepreneurship as a way out of unemployment, probably because these higher barriers they will have to face uh, inhibits their entry in the formal labor market, as Minichi and Audi exposed in 2010. Also, reaching this fostering entrepreneurship, women's entrepreneurship, is also a key point in order to achieve the sustainability, the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, such as the first one, end of poverty in all its forms everywhere. The eighth, that it's promote inclusive and sustainable economic growth, employment, and decent work for all. Number 10 is associated to the reduction of the inequalities. And finally, number 5, that it's a specific goal uh, accounting to gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. Moreover, we also want to highlight that the prevalence rate of female entrepreneurship may vary across countries depending on the level of economic development, such as that according to the most recently Global Entrepreneurship Monitor report, for example, female entrepreneurial activity is around 80% of men's total entrepreneurial activity in low-income countries, while this percentage represents around 66% of men's in high-income countries. And for example, in low-income countries, the total rate of women that began the rate of people that are beginning or running an entrepreneurial project in the last 24 months, that is the TEA rate, it's around 10% in high-income countries and 8% in the case of high-income countries. Oh, sorry, 10 in the case of low-income countries and 8 in the case of high-income countries. So we want to know how we could or how could be increased the female entrepreneurship that depends on the one hand on women's individual characteristics and also in the general environment that shape the entrepreneurial ecosystems. And this general environment might vary across country depending on the level of economic development and other contextual circumstances. In this case, Bosma et al. Suggests that the amount and quality of entrepreneurship may be determined by, on the one hand, the entrepreneurial framework conditions that are related to the specific environment, and also the national framework conditions that are related to the general environment, such as social, economic, or labor regulation, political. It's in this framework in which we try on a specific issue of this framework where we want to focus in order to analyze the role that the labor market regulation may play in shaping the entrepreneurial activity of the several countries. So, the aim of the paper is to examine the extent to which labor market regulation matters for entrepreneurial activity under a gender perspective, that is, differentiating between women and men rates, and also distinguishing between high income and developing economies. Focusing on the literature review, we find that overall stricter employment regulation is expected to have adverse effects on entrepreneurship. However, recent evidence does not seem to find this exact relation to association between employment protection and entrepreneurship. We, in the paper, present some works in which we find that the empirical evidence is somehow mixed. We develop that employment protection, the labor market regulation, and labor market may be somehow associated to entrepreneurship rate because of three different issues. The first is the risk aversion, that is that probably people as occupation choice may be made used to prefer a work in which they are not the entrepreneurs. Also, for employees, it's important to highlight the opportunity cost in the sense that usually the uncertainty of leaving a paid job to underpin an entrepreneurial project may be somehow risky. So they stricter labor market regulation may make people to remain in their paid job. And also, stricter regulation might have the so-called chilling effect to new entrepreneurs. That is, people, when they are having in mind the possibility of launching an entrepreneurial project, they may be forgo their cost and the requirement that they will have in the future, and they could make people to think that this would be a very good idea. However, the particular effects on female and male entrepreneurship are usually neglected in the literature, and in this case, Boudreau and Nikolaev do not think a significant evidence between labor market regulation and entrepreneurial rates. So we developed three hypotheses. The first, in which we find that stricter labor market regulation is expected to be negatively connected with the higher rates of entrepreneurship, both for men and women. We also want to hypothesize that labor market regulation is linked somehow differently to the prevalence of female and male entrepreneurship. And finally, we try also to investigate whether the connection between a more flexible labor market and the level of male and female entrepreneurship may vary depending on the level of development of economies. To this end, we make use of an unbalanced panel data of 86 countries, in which 42 are high-income countries and 44 are low developing countries, low income countries, according to the World Bank guidelines. That data availability allow us to work in the period between 2004-2018, and as dependent variable, we consider on the one hand the female total entrepreneurship activity rate and the male total entrepreneurship activity rate. The total early stage entrepreneurial activity index is taken from the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor from the that it's also known as the GEM, in which it's indicated the percentage of the adult working age population aged between 18 and 64 by sex, women and men, in a country who are either in the process of starting a business or has already started a business in the last 42 months. As explanatory variable, we use the labor flexibility from the Heritage Foundation. This includes aspects such as the regulations concerning the minimum wages, the laws, the laws inhibiting layoffs, the severance requirements, and the restraints on hiring and hours work. This data range from 0 to 100, where 0 corresponds to the highest restraints and 100 corresponds to the maximum level of labor market flexibility or freedom. We also consider a set of control variables, such as the log of the GDP per capita, the GDP growth, the female and male labor force, the female and male unemployment rate, and as well as the population. And the year dummies in our models are between 2001 and 2018. We build the following model, econometric model, with the one-step system GMM, in which as dependent variable we take TEA is the dependent variable on entrepreneurial activity. We also consider the fixed term for each country that captures the permanent individual specific effects over time. We also take the TEA from the previous year. This is the level of the variable TEA. We also consider the corresponding index of labor flexibility, the GDP, the log of the GDP, and the control variables. Moreover, we also build an extended version of the model by including the interaction of the labor freedom with the GDP. And we include that as an additional variable in order to find possible variation when including this interaction. And the results shows that when we run separately the rate of entrepreneurship both for women and men, we found that we have data availability for 86 countries, and where we find that overall labor flexibility is inversely associated with the entrepreneurial rates. That is, the higher the labor flexibility, the lower the entrepreneurial rates. Or, said other ways, the stricter regulation, the higher the rate, the entrepreneurial rate. That it's something that we did not spec in the literature review according to the mainstream literature. So that it's something somehow that we did not spec in when we were building the theoretical framework. We also want to test this interaction between the labor flexibility and the log of the GDP per capita. we find in this case that when including this labor market flexibility variable, in this case, labor flexibility is only significant in the case of female entrepreneurship, but not in the case of male. And we also find that the GDP, the growth, the greater is the GDP, the lower is this association. That is, when countries have this inverse association between labor flexibility and entrepreneurial rates tend to decrease when the GDP of the countries are greater. It's something really interesting in this case. We also run separate regressions in this case for high-income countries on the one hand and developing countries. In this case, we have for high-income countries, we have 42 economies in this case, and we find that in this case for high-income countries, labor flexibility is not significantly associated to the entrepreneurial rates. However, when focusing on developing countries, we find that labor market flexibility is inversely associated with the entrepreneurial rates, but only in the case of female entrepreneurship, not in the case of males. That is something also impressive for these 44 countries. So, as concluding remarks, overall, as a general conclusions, we might say that stricter labor market regulations seems to be associated with higher rates of female and male early-stage entrepreneurial activities. And this relationship tends to be reversed as the level of the economic development of the country is higher. That is what we find in the first model and the second one. Focusing on high-income countries, we find that in advanced economies, labor flexibility does not seem to play a significant role in determining new ventures. What labor market regulation have no gender, and also they don't have effects on the early stage entrepreneurship for both females and males. And focusing on developing countries in this case, we find that stricter labor market regulation seems to be associated with higher rates of, in this case, only female early stage entrepreneurial activity. That is something highlighting. So as political implication, we might say that the findings highlighting how potential reforms, this finding highlight how these potential reforms of labor market institutions, particularly in the developing world, may entail considerable implications in terms of gender entrepreneurship and in the progress towards gender equality. It should also be deepened in the mechanisms through which labor market regulation may favor this female entrepreneurship in developing countries. And that is by the moment all. I think you find this preliminary version something interesting, and should you have any suggestions or questions, I will be very happy to answer. Sorry, I will put again here my email and also Maria Jose's mail, that are we are both the two presenters of this paper in this conference. And yeah, if you should have any question, I will be very happy to answer and to welcome any suggestions. So thank you very much and goodbye.